What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Thank God it's Monday. Podcast is here once again. We're bringing you our second guest, Jonathan from the Silicon Curtain. I almost said Silicon Valley, but no, it's Silicon Curtain. I knew I was going to make this mistake. Thankfully, I didn't. So Jonathan, he basically has his YouTube channel, started also back since March 2022, as far as I see his very first video. And what makes it unique, he is pretty much doing just the interviews, podcasts. He just talks to the camera like this. And he has guests from all spectrums, from all sides of the conflict. He has pro-Russian guests, pro-Ukrainian guests, and is very like polarizing. You're watching interview, you never know whose guest is, who is going to talk about what's going to talk about. Some of the guests are known, some guests are unknown, and this is just a library of knowledge, library of opinions. Incredible channel. I want to give now floor to Jonathan to explain a little bit more about his channel, what he is doing, because obviously he knows way more than me. So Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Russian dude, thank you so much for that fantastic introduction. I have to admit, I have watched your materials quite a bit, going back the last couple of years, so completely familiar with your introduction, and it's brilliant to sort of see that investors live. So that's a thrill. So on the channel, I'll go into my background in a minute. So there are Ukrainian voices, there are Western experts, there are military experts, cultural experts. It's a whole kind of range. There are a lot of Russian voices on, but I would say, I mean, all of them are not in Russia, and it would be dangerous for any of them to go back to Russia at this point, because everyone I feature is, a critic of Putin's regime. That's not to say all of them would have a sort of, a decolonizing point of view, but of course some of them do. Some of them have sort of fairly radical ideas about what needs to happen in Russia. Quite a few of them are, how would you call it? Нежелательная организация, enemies of the state kind of thing, or inagенты, which is foreign agents. So yeah, we featured quite a few on there. In fact, one, I won't say his name, one got rather put out when I introduced him as a foreign agent. He was like, no, I'm a нежелательная организация. That's far, more serious there. I'm very sorry. I think it's a badge of honor if people get that.
Yeah, in some ways, I do agree. I also obviously watch a lot of Russian YouTubers, Russian interviews or anything. A lot of them do consider if they are assigned the foreign agent status, this is pretty much, like you said, exactly like a badge of honor, that you stand for something, you do something great, you have your own voice, you have your own opinion, and it's not budging just because some propaganda, some regime tells you otherwise. So yeah, I do completely understand. I agree with this. And yeah, once again, very glad that you have those people from both sides on your channel as in interviews. Which, by the way, guys, after you finish this interview, please go ahead, obviously, to Jonathan's channel, Silicon Valley, and you will see all these
Silicon Curtain. You did it
exactly, and I made that mistake. I did this mistake, and now my blue background is now not working anymore, but doesn't matter. So then, March 2022, like I mentioned in the very beginning, is when you started your channel. You did not, I think, unless you have any hidden videos, you were not reporting for the first 2-3 weeks of the war. So what was the point when you decide okay, I gotta say something, I gotta put my opinion out there on the internet? What was the trigger for you?
I mean, in hindsight, I should have broadcast or should have live streamed that very first night, but I was up all night when the first missiles were falling. I was expecting full-scale invasion, actually. In fact, I was expecting, from the first time that the Western intelligence data came out, it became clear that it was Ukraine, and it became clear to me, at least, that it was full scale. I know a lot of people didn't want to believe it. A lot of people didn't think it would happen, including quite a few of these sort of so-called, Russian opposition and so on, were saying, no, he's not going to do it because it would be literally insane. But no, I expected it, especially as I'd actually read Vladimir Vladimirovich's so-called paper on the, historic sameness of Ukraine and Russia and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's an absolute, there's nothing historic about it. It's just a pure piece of mythology. But when you write that in the way that, say, Hitler writes Mein Kampf, it's like, okay, this guy's going to do something. He's going to do something about it. They don't bother announcing that kind of stuff unless they're going to take it seriously. So I was already planning out the guest list. I joined Twitter while the first missiles were falling, started building out a network, looking at who was commentating, who are the experts out there. The reason I didn't publish straight away is I'd never been on YouTube before. And I had this sort of, well, who the hell am I kind of attitude to it. And then I spoke to some, this was a really big mistake as well. I spoke to some videographers who do sort of professional video stuff, and they were giving me tons of conflicting advice. And you should buy all this equipment and do this. And then I recorded a few interviews, and they were like, well, you really need to clean the sound quality up on that. So there's this big, long delay while I listened to experts and sort of missed the opportunity to say something. I intend to do this channel much earlier. I mean, I was planning the channel out in 2021 because, watching channels like Dost, I don't watch that now, but I was watching Dost at the time and watching quite a few of the other sort of stuff. I can't remember his name as well, but there's the guy who's really into architecture, travels a lot, big fluffy hair. Anyway, I was watching him, and most people.
I think Ilya Varlamov you're
It's
talking
Varlamov,
about,
of course it is.
Yes,
Ilya
yes, yes,
Varlamov.
yes.
Yeah, I was watching his stuff as well, and it became clear through 2021 that the sanitary laws and the repression that had really been sort of tested out in the the revolution in Belarus that failed, and during COVID, these repressive measures were just getting more and more intense, and then through 2021, the government started forcing its opponents either underground or tried to force them out of the country. People like Vitor Shenderovich, who's one of the main opposition satirists and commentators, one of his friends in the administration came to him and said, "Look, you need to get out because they're going to arrest you, and this is a joke this time. They're really." So it became clear to me that something was coming down the pipes very early on in 2021, and I thought I have to do something about this. I wrote a few articles, I created a blog, no one read it, and so the impetus was there, and it was the full scale war that sort of triggered me to actually get onto YouTube and break down that kind of imposter syndrome type barrier.
Yeah, you did mention some experts saying, like, I know it may be not too much relevant to war stuff, but I also completely agree. So if some of you are watching, guys, if you're also aspiring YouTubers, if you want to start something on your own, if it's either blogs, vlogs with camera, with just microphone, visual, audio, like, just start. I started with the $15 Amazon tripod for my phone and literally $15 microphone which I connect to my phone. That's it. I started making videos like this. Nothing like this. Later on, when you get the traction, maybe when you start filming some more videos, when you kind of enjoy the process, the very first thing you should maybe care about is the sound. Don't worry about like extraordinary $800 cameras, backgrounds, nothing like this.
Green screen and all that.
Yeah. Just get yourself maybe a good microphone. $100 maybe to begin with should be way more than enough. And yeah, just begin, just start. Don't worry. Like, you never know until you start. You never know until you try. So that's pretty much off-topic advice maybe from this interview. So speaking about the interviews, since we're obviously doing here one, you're a master interviewer and the guest at this point, I'm assuming. I think you have like, 850 videos on your channel. Most of them are interviews, right?
That is, there's some news items there. So we're now almost up to, in a month or so, we'll be up to 700 interviews, which is more than many journalists manage to do in their careers, actually. And I'm certainly not a journalist by training. So,
yeah. Speaking about 700, just a quick fun fact about, I don't want to take spotlight from you, but you just said 700. For me, that's a magical number. Once again, speaking about that, you guys just start and don't worry, just start. I made 700 videos first before I started to get traction. So these 700 first videos were like getting 15 to 20 views. After that, they started to gain some traction. Don't worry, just start, keep doing it. If you feel like it, you're gonna make it, just keep doing, don't stop. That's like, it just turning out now to motivational podcast, which is not...
No, it's absolutely right though. I mean, I did it for a whole year and you're getting sort of dozens of views per video, and it can be very disheartening, especially when, you think, hang on a second, maybe that I could do better on that one, but this was brilliant. Oh, and 125 people have seen it.
Yep.
Think of it as you're not trying to game an algorithm, but you're trying to train the algorithm for your material. You're trying to train it into what kind of audience is going to enjoy it. And I think when you start sort of doing that and looking at it as a sort of process like that, and something that you really need to invest in, then just stick with it. It's consistency, it's quality. You've got to keep the passion up, but you just got to keep going. And I mean, you probably will get very little for the first year, but if you've got something people like, yeah, year two, it'll almost certainly take off, I'd say.
So yeah, that's enough for motivation. Let's get back to what people are assembled here for. So back to the interviews and everything. 850, 700 of them are the interviews. Have some guests which appeared once, some appeared multiple times. I think I know the answer to the next question. At least one of the people, like the question is, from these interviews, can you name like your top 3 favorite guests, like who you always want to have on your
Oh,
channel,
boy.
who always so fun to speak, and who you propose for my audience who is watching right now to go on your channel and see these interviews first, like to hook them,
It really depends on what people like. I mean, you'll know what I'm going to say because, of course, one of my I like the ones that where there's two categories of ones I really like. One is where it's someone new, you've never interviewed them before, maybe they're not even well known at all, but you discover someone, and perhaps during the course of the interview, they discover themselves that they've got an ability to communicate and talk, and you create something that feels quite magical. At that point, I don't care if anyone watches it. I feel that's we've broken some new ground. We've found a voice which no one would have seen before, but they're going to want to hear from this person again, and their expertise shines through as well as their passion and stuff. Those are probably still my favorite ones. But there's another category where I speak regularly to people where essentially I'm not fulfilling the role of an interviewer or a journalist or anything like that. It's actually a friend. It's as if we're sitting in a pub. And that's how I often imagine it. I just without the beer, unfortunately. But it's as if we're in a pub and just having a good kind of conversation. And I think a lot of people have said that that's what it feels like watching. And some of them might actually have a drink, or they might be out for a jog or in the car, and it's like they're listening to two friends. They can almost imagine they're part of that conversation as well. So there's people like Operator Starsky, Anna from Ukraine, obviously Konstantin Samalov, who I would now consider a very good friend, and also someone who's, well, I would say health and welfare. I've got concerns for, as I have for many of my people I've interviewed. Konstantin, he talks about in his podcast, so it's not a huge secret. Is in Uzbekistan, like many Russians who either oppose the regime or don't want to be conscripted or a mixture of both are no longer in the country. So whether they're in Armenia or Georgia or Uzbekistan or wherever, it's something that was forced on many people. But those who speak out, like yourself and like Konstantin, could be in, they're taking risks by speaking out, and certainly, Constant has to be careful, as have a lot of people have to be in places like Uzbekistan, because not to bring the tone down a little bit. You do have ethnic Russian GRU officers operating in the ex-Soviet space with impunity. And of course, the local governments know they're there, and it's the same in Georgia, I think, as well. So yeah, there's a degree of concern, of course, for some of my guests. Another one and then there are other ones who come on repeatedly, but they're quite well-known public figures and so on. So I would count them as sort of colleagues, and it's of interest, but I've never sat down or met them in real life and don't necessarily have the banter. But then you also sort of follow up they're doing. I mean, one of them is quite dramatic. He's been on 3 times, I think, now, which is a chap called Ilya Ponomarov, who is the spokesperson for the Russian Free Battalions. So he's kind of unusual because he's actually aligned with not just opposition, but a group of Russians who've picked up arms to essentially fight a civil war, which is what they're doing. And of course, they're very, very high on the target list. And indeed, Ponomarov and his family were almost assassinated by drones in Kiev a couple of months ago over Christmas. And there was this very dramatic picture of him kind of alive, but covered in blood after the front of his house was blown out by drones.
Yeah, so as you can see, guys, it is like it might feel like we're in safety. It might feel like, well, we've been doing this for 3 years already, so nothing is gonna happen. But yeah, it always comes unexpected. So, and yeah, I'm glad that you give voice to people like this, like Ilya Ponomarev. So, like, yeah, because the narrative needs to be spread. Because once these voices are silenced, I mean, that's it. It only becomes one-sided story, propaganda, and slowly but surely, if you're only fed one side of the story, eventually you will start kind of first jokingly believing it, but then you're like, hey, like this little thing makes sense, that little thing makes sense. And yeah, if you do not have these opposing voices, eventually some people take years, some people take days, months, weeks. It's gonna get you as well eventually. So yeah, very thank you for having those guests on your podcast and not discriminating pro-Russians, pro-Ukrainians, Russians, Ukrainians,
I wouldn't say
Western people.
pro-Ukraine. I mean, they're not necessarily pro-Russians. They're Russians who are opposed to, the regime. I think this
No,
is call them that.
yeah. I just kind of generalized for better words,
Yeah.
but yeah, we all got the idea. So then also, I guess I opened the can of worms. I guess this is what Americans say by saying pro-Russians. Did you have any like extreme like pro-Putin guests on your channel? No, it did not happen.
None
No.
at all, because and I do, like yourself and like Konstantin, I will watch a lot of the material. So I'll watch Solovyov, I'll watch Simonyan, and Zakharov, although my ears tend to bleed after listening to her with her nasty little high-pitched voice. I won't watch Peskov or Lavrov, because why? I mean, they literally every word is a lie. But of course, we'll look at what they're saying and try and analyze what they're saying, because if you invert the lie, sometimes you actually find out what their intentions are. But I don't think there's anything meaningful. If I had any of them on, or Trenin, or any of the others, Dugin, for goodness sake, I don't think anyone would learn anything useful, because either everything's a lie or everything's some kind of artifice or manufactured to try and manipulate. Whatever they're saying is ultimately sanctioned by the regime. So there's very little authenticity and truth in there. Or it's just, if they're actually saying things they really believe, then it's probably going to be really hateful, genocidal nonsense. Within 2 seconds, they'd end up shouting at the screen and, screaming obscenities at them. I just, I couldn't hold a rational conversation, and they wouldn't say anything rational in return. So I don't think there's much use. Where it could be interesting to have conversations, now I would say everyone I feature on the channel more or less now ascribes to, I would say, what's called a decolonial narrative, which is that they accept that Russia is acting as an imperial entity, and actually that's a historic process. It's many other countries have taken a century or two to start to divorce themselves from their imperial ambitions, but Russia still maintains them, sort of in 18th, 19th century imperialism, with characters of genocide to it, cultural genocide, actual genocide, linguistic genocide, and you could list the number there. So everyone on the channel accepts that these things are true and that these things need to be fought. I would say their solutions, if they have any, of what needs to happen next, of course, are different, but they're all aligned with a certain point of view. All of them, this is a kind of litmus test as well, all of them think at this point in time that the invasion of Crimea was illegal, and that Crimea is Ukrainian sovereign territory and in one way or another needs to be returned. I think that's an interesting litmus test. But of course, this is a point of contention. I'd be interested to hear what you think, because before he was killed, I think it's pretty fair to say he was killed either directly or indirectly, Navalny changed his view on this, or at least clarified his view, to say that the invasion of Crimea was illegal and that it needed to be handed back. But at some point in time, he fudged a little bit. He said, Crimea is not a sandwich. You can't just pass it around. Almost certainly because he was concerned at alienating the people who he wanted to vote for him, whether he believed that or not. Hopefully you can cut that bit out. Whether he believed that or not, we'll never know. But unfortunately, there are people who are still hedging their bets on that very question. Yulia Navalny has not given a straight answer to that question. Vladimir Karamazov, who is on some levels a courageous and highly intelligent opposition individual, has. I need to look. I don't know if he's given a clear answer on Crimea, but he said some really problematic things about how sanctions need to be lifted. He said something in French to the French Parliament just a couple of weeks ago, which is absolutely reprehensible. He said that, you know, ultimately, if you want to look at the genocidal character of the war, that's not ethnic Russians. That's almost certainly, the colonized people in Russia, Burats and so on, because ethnic Russians couldn't do that because we're one and the same as peoples, as culture, and so on. So there's two insults in there. One, it's patently not true. The people planning the invasion, the people pressing the button, the people who are actually taking those ethnic minorities and sending them into the meat grinder are Russian. So it's an absolute fabrication, it's an absolute lie. But then to repeat the Kremlin's line that Ukrainians and Russians are exactly the same, we're one peoples, that is another piece of genocidal propaganda. Now, there are common there are shared parts of history. There are periods in common where you can look and say, okay, there's some sort of intermingling, there's some sharing, there's certain things going on, but the way it was framed was a pure piece of Kremlin propaganda. So that's the big question for me: is should I interview or could I interview oppositionists who actually have some problematic views? And actually, their problematic views, Karamazov, I haven't seen an interview with him. I haven't seen an interview with Navalny where they're really challenged on their so-called liberal imperialism. I haven't seen one where it really gets down and digs into the ultimate attitudes there. So maybe it's worthwhile to do that. I suspect they wouldn't agree to come on my channel because they know that they'd be in for a bit of a grilling.
No, that could be, once again, a good opportunity for them to explain their viewpoints, to explain why they said this, why they said this, unless they're going to be like trying to avoid the question or anything like this. For you as well, going to be a good opportunity to give them a platform to express why they said this or that and that, to
Yes.
once again explain themselves. And just in general, once again, if they do stick to their problematic views or questionable ideas, this could be once again create like interest. Any kind of emotion in the interview, in the podcast, is what brings makes it interesting, whether it's negative, positive emotions. Some people might think, oh, I know this guy is from Russian opposition, but why he's defending that Crimea is Russian so much? So like, let me hear what he has to say. And so unnatural, unusual, like some like guests who have opinions which different from others. It's always a very good guest on every podcast interview or whatever you're doing online. So
And the ones
I
I'd
mean,
love to interview, of course, are dead. The ones who would be really fantastic, people like Boris Nemtsov, Anna Politkovskaya, they would be extraordinary to interview. And obviously the Joko Dudayev, and a lot of people have seen, the clip, him talking about, the Russian Empire ending when the Ukrainian sun rises. That would be an extraordinary character to have in an interview. But of course, none of these can. They're all dead. They've all been murdered.
yeah, I can only imagine. Yeah, like Boris Nemtsov specifically. Unfortunately, no way physically we can interview him, but yeah, I can only imagine this will be the interview for ages. Like, yeah. This will be the interview. I also quickly saw also when I was going through your channel that I will need to even look at my notes. So
Yes,
some of
sure.
your guests or some topics are of weaponized conspiracy theories.
Yes.
Have you had any guests about with these topics, or have you had any conversations about weaponized conspiracy theories?
Yes, absolutely. So, one notable one, and there's been several, and it's not just the sort of Russian conspiracies, or those put around by propagandists sitting in the Lubyanka, whatever. We also looked at Brexit, and one of the most notable ones was a researcher into propaganda who had basically uncovered the Cambridge Analytica, which was the technology that is thought to have been used to help underpin the campaign that got Brexit over the line. So this very sort of shady, murky area of digital manipulation. So a combination of narratives, plus digital data modeling, so these narratives can be targeted. So very, very early use of AI probably, and a very early use of very large data sets to do highly selective targeting at people. Now, of course, that stuff, I mean, Brexit is almost 10 years ago now. I can barely believe it. And with AI, one can only imagine how much better these systems are. We know some of those were in use in Trump's first term to help get him elected, and certainly in the second term they would have been used extensively. So that's the intersection that's fascinating to me is the manipulation of political and social narratives, and then the use of really high technology and large data sets to absolutely sort of manipulate, especially subgroups of an electorate, which can have a massive difference if you can segment and target them that way. But I guess an interest in this came about because we were talking before I hit the video, and I was in Russia in the 1990s, and obviously almost everyone there still had a memory of, not being able to trust the news. People who will be thinking that now, of course, not only in Russia, but the West as well. But there was a period where, news that was not controlled by the state, news that wasn't as dull as ditch water, was quite a novel experience. But the news in the 90s was very much controlled by different oligarchs. So, of course, there were certain interests imbued in it. But essentially, they had free news. So they were used to this idea of nothing in the news being either interesting or possibly true. So where do people get their impression of reality? Where do they get, how do they get their news? Well, they share it. It's in anecdotes, in conversations. It's kind of verbal samizdat, as it kind of were. And that can be very useful, but it can also give rise to highly conspiratorial thinking, because ideas that maybe untrue or mythologized spread very easily in that kind of verbal culture. And so in the 90s, you're always constantly sort of asking the question, what's true, what isn't, what's made up, what's exaggerated. It's quite a useful process for where we are now.
Yeah, absolutely. And you did mention a lot of your part of the history, part of your story when you were in Russia in the 90s, in the beginning of the 90s. So this is, by the way, whenever Jonathan was saying some Russian words, Russian names with a pretty good Russian pronunciation, because he does speak Russian, and this is very impressive. So, as you can see, guys, 700 interviews, definitely something to choose from. He named at least 3 people: Konstantin Samoilov, which is more commonly known for you guys inside Russia, then Anna from Ukraine, Operator Starsky. So definitely you can go ahead and watch at least a couple of his interviews, get hooked, because this is a very well-spoken man. The interviews are very good, professional, very well structured. Definitely you'll find something. I have one question now for you before we end. This is probably going to be my traditional question to end all the interviews. Signature question. Some of you probably going to recognize it, some of you not, but this is such a cool question. If you're in front of Putin, what are you going to tell him?
Nothing. There's nothing you can tell him that would, I think, change his worldview. What I find remarkable is the people like Stephen Witkoff, or Witless Witkoff, as I think of him, who clearly had a great deal of, I don't know, he had emotion, anticipation. He clearly was looking forward to meeting Putin. This is a big moment in his life, and he shook his hands. That's one thing I couldn't do and wouldn't do, is shake his hand. That is a hand steeped in blood, murder, torture. If you touch that hand, you are soiled, you are compromised. He's an evil man. I mean, obviously, you wouldn't get close enough to strangle him, or smash his head into the wall, or whatever, or punch him and see his body just projected along that enormous long table, improbably long table. But I find it extraordinary. This is part of the this is part of the theatre of the Kremlin and Kremlin power, is I think they build up this aura of the man as almost an infallible god. And so people are just sort of, who are stunned into silence when they see him, or into reverential awe. I don't think I could feel anything other than loathing for him, for the suffering that he's inflicted. Truly evil person.
Completely understandable. Nothing to say, nothing to add. Completely understandable.
I might just call him a dolbayob or something. But,
I wonder if the YouTube automatic subtitles will pick up on this word.
You can bleep that one out, yes.
It's okay. Well, I guess on that note, thanks so much, Jonathan, from Silicon Curtain, for appearing on this channel, second guest on Thank God It's Monday podcast. I will leave all the links to your YouTube, any socials I can find down below in the description. Please go ahead, subscribe to Jonathan. Incredible podcasts, incredible interviews. Subscribe to my channel if you want to keep watching these podcasts. And then, see you tomorrow. Thanks so much for watching.
Thank you. What a great honor.